And welcome back. The Northwest Community Safety Department says it's analysing data collected from Shaft 11 in Stilfontein, where thousands of illegal miners are believed to be underground. The second phase of the government task team-led retrieval of illegal miners from the underground in Stilfontein is underway with the involvement of the South African Police Services as well as the South African National Defence Force. A camera was sent underground for further assessments before extraction commenced. Phase 2 is met with multiple complexities. Dr. Adwo Boabuo, a mine safety expert, joins us to make sense of this. Dr. Boabuo, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. Perhaps let's start here. Mining and mining environments present its own unique geological complexities that any rescue effort needs to be acquainted with, and as well as being able to manage the risks associated with it. What could the potential risks be that the Stilfontein Mine and the rescue efforts there are encountered with? Or perhaps just at a basic level, what sort of tick boxes need to be ticked off by rescue efforts?
Okay, so the first one would be the excavations in which you're going into. We need to make sure that they are structurally sound, that, you know, as I mentioned previously, there's a risk of seismicity and rockfalls, and the type of, you know, support you put underground to manage this risk, it has deteriorated, probably deteriorated at this point. But one of the biggest issues here is that of heat. Heat stress, because at depths of about a kilometer and more, you experience a virgin rock temperature of about 52 degrees Celsius. So it's really, really hot. So you need to make sure that the people undergoing there to do the rescue, number one, they are able to work in that type of heat. And, you know, that's just one of the biggest stresses or one of the biggest risks, because even normal mining employees, you subject them to heat tolerance screening in order to make sure they're fit enough to go underground. We don't have refrigeration. We only rely on natural ventilation pressure, which means the natural flow of air through those shafts. So you've got restricted air, you've got heat stress risks as well, you've got the risk of structural instability, you've got the risk of gases like methane down there, which can, you know, cause suffocations, fires and explosions. You've also got the risk of psychological stress. So so let's start with the environment itself.
Sure.
Making sure that all the controls are in place to make sure these risks are mitigated. And then there's also the people. The people in terms of, are they mentally able to perform this rescue? Are they physically fit enough to perform this rescue? So those are some of the risks that are presented and some of the things that you need to mitigate.
Yeah, you mentioned some of the chemicals that at an atomic level can be hazardous, such as carbon monoxide on the one hand. What are some of the other chemicals that in this instance could present very specifically a medical complication, given that this rescue effort is not just about retrieval, it's about stabilization of what is essentially weak miners underground, and then retrieval during that process, because we're dealing here with people whose bodies have become frail due to a lack of food, poor oxygen supply, as you've identified earlier, as well as a lack of hydration. So what are the other biochemical hazards that the rescue efforts need to be aware of?
I think one of the biggest ones, in my opinion, would be methane. Because, you know, when you go underground, you encounter certain methane pockets, and I think one can really Google the consequences of being exposed to methane. So for me, right now, I think the one I'll mention is just methane, in addition to carbon monoxide.
Methane has a high density of flammability.
Yes.
It is also dangerous in that it can spark some sort of explosion. How do they mitigate against the dangers of methane?
So the one method, in a regular mine, like I mentioned, with your regular equipment, you would ventilate, you would mitigate it with ventilation. But in this case, I am sure that they would be given certain personal protective equipment, such as maybe a respiratory system, to enable them to go into these areas. But apart from ventilation, apart from ventilation designed in your mine ventilation ventilation system. There's really no other way. And what you also get is a GDI, or a device that detects gases underground. So maybe that's another one, but that's more of on your reactive side. So the one that we rely on mostly, which is being proactive, is ventilation, and it's not present. So I'm sure they'll be testing for these gases before they allow the rescue teams to go in.
Yeah, shafts, especially underground shafts, interact with other parts of the geological rock plane, such as water bodies that could potentially exist there. That in and of itself can either be a danger or perhaps be an assistance in terms of getting hydration. Perhaps that water is usable. I have no idea. I'm being hopeful here. And perhaps at a secondary level, a chemical acts as a chemical to cool down what is extremely high underground temperatures. What do we know about the water bodies in the rock form in the Stilfontein Mine?
So I'll just talk about water bodies underground. If the water has not been purified, it really cannot be consumed, because you need to remember, before all of this happened, there was explosive activity happening underground. So these chemicals from the explosives obviously contaminate the water, and you don't really know what the water source is. I'm not familiar with the hydrology at Stilfontein. You don't know whether it comes from what the water source is. You don't know how long it's been there for. It might even be water that flows from, because these mines are interconnected. These different mines at Stilfontein Gold Mining Company are interconnected. So sometimes the water, they're probably mining at a shallower depth, and the water is flowing from a first generation mine to a second generation mine. So it might be water that's flowing from different or different interconnected mines. So no, it's definitely not advisable for that water to be drank. And as to cool themselves off with the water, perhaps they do it for survival, but from a health and safety perspective, that's also not advisable.
Yeah. Dr. Adwo Boabuo, thank you so much for your time and your insights. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Dr. Boabuo is a mine safety expert, helping us make sense of that.